Alright everyone, we start off today with Biden's concerning comments with regards to Iran. It seems like he genuinely wants a war with them, and to be a wartime president, because perversely populations tend to forgive their leaders for shitty diplomatic mistakes. When a war pops off that we get directly involved in, they're more likely to vote for that individual as an incumbent. It is perverse, and it's sort of the opposite of common sense, because you'd think generally the United States originally was incepted to be a country of peace and not to fuck around with other people, avoid foreign entanglements, and say, look, we just want to farm and chop down trees and live our lives. We're tired of this old world bullshit. But instead, the United States, partially by pursuing such a policy, became so successful that it became the linchpin of the Western world, and then atomic weapons were developed and MAD began, the grand chessboard, and unfortunately, the rest is history. Some of the most fun things of modern culture are the result of a perverted deviated preverts, you could say, from original foreign policy, New World style. Biden wants a war with Iran. Link in the description, archived, of course. The other day he warns, well, Iran is probably going to try to conduct strikes in Israel sooner rather than later, which it's like, do you have any forewarning on that? You probably do. And the Iranians will probably be crazy enough to do it. You know why? Because they want Biden reelected. Because Biden's leadership sucks. He doesn't have any leadership. The Biden administration is a hodgepodge. We have an out-to-lunch president. We have an out-to-lunch vice president. We have court intrigue. We have constant backstabbing and infighting within the administration. They can't get along with each other, so there's no unified, singular foreign policy. What Biden proposes is not necessarily what Kamala's people want to put forth. Not necessarily what Blinken wants. So on down the line. The military brass, who have been, wokeified and everything like that, we have no singular foreign policy. Our enemies are taking advantage of this. In Iran's case, it's not really an enemy in the sense of being an existential threat to the United States, but it is a regional power. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Biden is fundamentally correct. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. None of what's happening right now in the Middle East needed to happen. All you had to do was have a unified, singular Western front in which the message was clear, so people knew the ramifications of fucking around and finding out. And the hope is that you speak softly and say, look, you don't fuck with any of our allies, or you don't fuck with us, we're not going to fuck with you. You go along your merry business, we're perfectly fine, it's all good. But carry a big stick and make it quite clear that you'll get curb stomped into the pavement if you do fuck around. And then you'll find out. We've got the opposite under the Joe Biden administration. We've got speak very loudly with bellicose rhetoric. That's an old moniker from the 2010s, Obama era. But then you have a little stick. You half-ass it like we do in Ukraine, which never needed to pop off. It was quite clear that that would never have happened under Donald Trump presidency, for example. In Israel v. Gaza, or v. Hamas rather, that would not have popped off. I'm sure that diplomacy would have prevailed in that situation had U.S. leadership been actually competent. But it's not competent. The current leader of the free world, so to speak, is not a leader at all. He can't even determine what he's going to eat for dinner. Jill Biden has to make sure to tailor his menu so he doesn't poop himself in his sleep. This is probably why we have all of these wars popping off. I'm beginning to wonder if maybe Taiwan won't be invaded by the Chinese at some point. I mean, and that's the worst case scenario. We're right back in the Cold War, but we didn't need to. All we needed to do was have sane, strong Western leadership, and the hope is that you can avoid war. It's literally peace through strength. We're too big to fuck around with. Don't fuck with us. And if you don't fuck with us, we have no problem with you. We may not necessarily always get along. We may have diplomatic differences. We may have trade disputes, but we handle it like responsible modern nations. This is what we had for a few short, glowing years under Donald Trump. And it's been conspicuously absent for the last few years under Joseph Biden. It's very unfortunate because now millions of people could die as the result of this. Biden is warning that Iran may attack Israel, in which case probably all hell ends up breaking loose because Israel will retaliate. There's no telling exactly what form that retaliation will take. Netanyahu understands something. And again, it goes to the same thing that I've talked about with regards to Ukraine v. Russia, etc. Countries in that part of the world, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, most of Asia, other than a few of them, they don't operate the same way. People need to understand that there are differences between cultures. This is what Biden didn't understand with regards to Afghanistan. The withdrawal, which was minted by Trump, was a good idea. Everyone agreed that we needed to be out of the country, but you had to do it responsibly. Once you make a deal in the Pashtun culture there, where tribal warlords disproportionately wield even more power collectively than the Taliban, you need to keep to the agreement that you've minted. If your country, speaking as a collective whole, decides to unilaterally punt the withdrawal date several months ahead, just to spite Donald Trump so he can't take credit for the withdrawal because it weren't his date, I decided or I had a better date, then you have breached the agreement. That's a bad idea, because then you get curb stomped. You get fucked. You don't want to fuck around in Afghanistan anyway. It's called the graveyard of nations for a reason. The same is true within the Middle East. Of course, Afghanistan being in Central Asia. Agreements need to be kept to. You need to present a strong, unified front. You need to be strong. Take pride in yourself, but offer no insult. Biden does exactly the opposite. He'll make some vague threat towards another nation and then never follow through with it. It's exactly the opposite of a sane policy towards most of the nations in the world that we have to deal with that aren't already our allies. Nobody worries about insulting the French ambassador. Nobody worries about insulting the Belgian ambassador or the president of Spain. Okay, it leads to a strongly worded letter and then you apologize. Ta-da, that's diplomacy the Western world way. It's the diplomacy the way it should work in the whole world. But that's not the way that Iranian culture or Afghan culture, Pashtun culture, etc. work. Biden is incapable of understanding this. He doesn't understand even how to control his bowel movements. Kamala doesn't understand it. Blinken is basically a diversity hire. He can't even answer basic foreign policy questions to the goddamn Secretary of State. So wars pop off. And then a bunch of people die. Joe Biden is uniquely incompetent for this exact moment in time. It's the perfect storm, so to speak, in the military and diplomatic sense. Biden has weakened the U.S. military, expended enormous amounts of money and ammunition, so to speak, and military goods of every kind, towards proxy wars that never needed to exist in the first place. If you want to prevent war in some parts of the world, you have to say basically, we're strong, don't fuck around. If you don't fuck around, we have no problem with you. He does the exact opposite. It's like when they send Blinken over to Israel, it's like, yeah, that's going to accomplish a whole lot. Biden wants this, though. He realizes right now he's on the skids. He's not ahead in any of the competitive states. He's not ahead in general election polling. He's literally losing to somebody who might have to run from house arrest with an ankle monitor on. So, what better way to get reelected than to start a war? Plausible deniability, by the way, for ballot printers going burr. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if we get drawn into some sort of conflict with Iran. A regional war in the Middle East, at least. And then U.S. Forces will go in as advisors. It'll be just like Vietnam. You know, we've seen this trick before with the Gulf of Tonkin and things like that. You can get some false flag events. You send them some U.S. advisors, and they simply provide logistics. A little bit of recon here and there. We're not actually at war with them. No, I mean, we're helping people shoot them, but we're not actually at war. See, the problem is Iran has a reasonably developed military and happens to be effectively a vassal state of the Russians, the other main nuclear power in the world, and the linchpin in the military sense of the whole Eastern Bloc. It would probably antagonize the Chinese. They may retaliate by attacking Taiwan. The U.S. has taken few steps to secure that island. We should be encouraging them to adopt a militia strategy like Switzerland. We could retrofit the whole island and militarize it within 6 months. Have we done anything of the sort? No, instead we just antagonize China. We keep poking the dragon. It might be a paper dragon, but it does have a naval capability. We keep antagonizing them without making any sort of arrangements for actually defending our allies within the region. Joe Biden and his administration are so weak, so feckless, and so stupid that they risk literally popping off several regional wars. I mean, You kind of got one already. Israel has struck targets in Syria. It's struck targets in Lebanon. It's not necessarily diplomatically as even-handed with the Egyptians as it was a few years ago. Some problems there with the Rafah crossing and things like that. It's lost the optics war, and yet we single-mindedly pursue the policy of propping them up without even attempting any real diplomacy. Because you can't attempt diplomacy. The messaging of the administration is all over the place. If Israel is forced to stand alone, it'll eventually resort to nuclear weapons. The United States government fundamentally knows this, but in order to avoid that sort of situation, you have to present a strong front in the United States. The same is true with Ukraine. Trump gets elected. One of the first things he does is go and talk to Putin, and allegedly, and he claims this himself, says, hey, I'm going to bomb Moscow, by the way, if you fuck around in Ukraine, so leave them alone. That's something that the Russian government will respect. Hey, well, you know, they do have nukes and stuff. I'd really love to invade this country, but it seems like the risk is not worth the potential reward. We'll get bogged down. We may end up with the United States in a direct fight. We can't do that because we're both nuclear powers. You know, we'll wait till later, basically. Unfortunately, with the change of leadership, they scented victory, and they said, well, now U.S. leadership is going to be dumb because Joe Biden's out to lunch. All of a sudden, wars start popping off all over the world. Well, who would have guessed that that would be the result of the inversion of U.S. leadership strategy and the weakening of the U.S. military? And that's the other problem. You're going to try to fight the Iranians, right? If the U.S. military is at peak readiness, like it was under Trump, like it oddly was under Clinton, actually, oh, it'll kick the shit out of anyone. No problem. But then you always get these really weird presidents in between, like George W. Or Obama to an extent, or certainly Joe Biden, who constantly warmonger, but then they make absolutely no arrangements for having a powerful enough military to be able to carry through with it. And other countries understand this. Effectively, the biggest diplomatic problem that the United States has is that we occasionally get chief executives, the chief diplomat, and technically the war leader, although they don't go into combat anymore. Personally, I think that they should be forced to send their kids off into battle on the front lines when they start a war. Yeah, it would have been funny if the Bush twins had to go fight in Iraq. It probably would prevent some wars. I think we should probably have a constitutional amendment about that. Hey, when politicians vote in favor of declaring war or they support entering into a conflict, all of their children are immediately conscripted. If they have disabilities or something, that doesn't matter. We can get them a role peeling potatoes on a U.S. vessel or something like that. And what we get is these intermittent leaders that speak very loudly, but they don't wield a stick. They don't understand what they're doing. With George W., he was war mad. He just wanted to invade countries to avenge Daddy. That's why we entered Iraq. With Herbert Walker, he withdraws at the last moment in Iraq inexplicably, and then that leads to what W did. With Obama, he would say, don't you cross that red line. He said this to the Syrians, and they repeatedly crossed it. Said it to the North Koreans, they repeatedly crossed it, because they said, fuck you. Not gonna do shack shit. Under Trump, this never happened, now did it? It's almost like he has a unique understanding of these Eastern cultures because he did business in their boardrooms. We need Donald Trump back more now than ever. We've got a sitting president of the United States openly declaring a warmongering intent towards goddamn Iran. The second in command under Russia in that particular sphere. A state that possibly is developing atomic weapons. You're talking about a major regional catastrophe that could spill over into World War III, dude. I don't think people are taking this quite seriously enough, and Biden is crazy enough to do it for partially self-serving reasons. That's about all. Peace out.